Se referirá a los factores claves para el desarrollo del mercado de valores a cargo del Dr. Roberto Rocha, Head of Equities de Citi Brasil, cargo que ejerce desde el año 2006, abogado de la Universidad de Sao Paulo y miembro de la Asociación Brasilera de Abogados. Cuenta con más de 20 años de experiencia en el sector bursátil en Brasil y Latinoamérica. Trabajó como director de venta de renta variable para Latinoamérica en el banco Deutsche Brasil y Deutsche X en Nueva York. Bienvenido, adelante.
Gracias, buenas tardes a todos. Primeramente me gustaría de agradecer la invitación, más especialmente mi partner Federico Suárez, que me ha invitado para estar aquí con ustedes hoy. La presentación tengo que hacerla en inglés porque en español va a salir un portuñol que no va a estar bien. Entonces cambio para inglés. Espero que esté bien. So just to start, I think to put into context what I'm trying to access here and to present over to you is to give a good link to my previous the previous presentation that my colleague Annette showed to you, making reference of the accessibility financial index, which showed that Brazil is one of the countries with that is most developed within our region. And intend to demonstrate and illustrate with that, giving the history and key events that we had in Brazil to show what we have done right and what we have not done that right, or what still needs development. So what I'm trying to access here, I'm going to go over a little bit of the history and key events of the equity capital markets in Brazil. I'm going to show you the investors and the companies who are part of this market, which, you know, it's a key participants. The trading statistics that we have for each segment, that it shows how developed each segment is. The stock lending market, which was created back in 2001, beginning 2002, and has developed quite a lot since over the time. And essentially, I'll go through all the main sectors that we have represented in our equity market and the difference between trading and settlement instructions, Brazil versus the United States. So we can put into context where we are and what are the key difference between the two markets. And I think, like, for the region, I think would be a good example. So in terms of history, I think the equity market in Brazil started before the 19th century, the 1890, with the foundation of the Bovespa market. Right after we had the public certificates started to be traded at the exchange as well at that time. We had a long period which we did not have a big evolution, but then we had the mutualization of the market when all the brokers became owners of the exchange, of the São Paulo Stock Exchange. And essentially that's where we had, I think, the first phase of organization and participation of companies and investors. In 1986, we had the creation of the Futures Exchange, which was a landmark for us. Clearly, the Futures Exchange was created as a need from the banks, the local banks, to mitigate risk. And I think to the point that Annette also presented earlier, this is something that was worked and pushed by the banks with the brokers and with the regulators. So with that, then it was created. We had essentially interest rates, futures, FX futures, gold futures, because we were in hyperinflation days and gold was a way of store value in Brazil in those days. and the Ibovespa future index. But in 1996, that was the time when we created the futures market. In 1997, we started to be more electronic with a platform that started to pretty much be substituting the outcry market that we had in Brazil. Then we had the launch of the home broker and the internet broker in 1999, and the creation of the Novo Mercado. The Novo Mercado was a very important step under like regulatory and improvement of governance. And the Novo Mercado, in fact, with the creation, we had also a big push in the Brazilian authorities to change and to improve corporate governance law. Back in 1997, when Cardoso's administration was in place, he made big changes cutting or diminishing the minority shareholders' rights, because the government had a very ambitious plan on privatization and wanted to capture all the premium, selling the control of the companies and not sharing that premium that was captured with minority shareholders. So he was like opportunistic to making the changes, and then the 1997, 1998, 1999, we had a big program on privatization, that being the telecom system, the Telebras system that was privatized. And then what we had, we had the minority shareholders through brokers and the exchange pushing for the creation of Novo Mercado, where rules of higher standards for corporate governance and more rights to minority shareholders were put in place. Back in 2000 and 2001, in fact, we had the government, after making all the privatizations, passing and going back or reverting all the measures that they have taken in order to privatize and put again the rights for minorities back in place. In 2002, we had the initial of our stock lending operations activities, which, as I said, like are very important because of it gives other trading opportunities and trading strategies opportunities for market participants. I think it's important to call the attention that that happened as a result also of the brokers and the banks. And essentially what we had, that the banks had in their own proprietary trading desks, strategies going relative value, going long and short some of the names, being long, for instance, a telecom name, and being short another one, making the opportunity that one company is doing better than the other within the sector. And that strategy was only made possible with the creation of the stock lending market. And in 2004, we also had the evolution of the internet-based trading. In 2005, the end of the outcry negotiations. 2006, a new technology for all the infrastructure for Bovespa that made possible for the big jump in volumes that we were seeing. Essentially, and in that time, 2005 and 6 were exactly the time when we saw an increasing number of IPOs, and number of companies grew by almost 70 in a year, and in which the volumes also grew. 2007, we had the demutualization of both the stock exchange and the futures exchange, and the IPO of both companies. And in 2008, we had the merger of the stock exchange with the futures exchange under BM&F. And essentially the futures exchange was stronger because of the number of tradings that we had there, and they were they incorporated the stock exchange. in 2009, we had the agreement with the NASDAQ. In 2010, Chicago Mercantile Exchange acquired shares of the BMF, and the BMF acquired 5% of the shares of the Chicago Exchange. And in 2014, I think it was a key event as well, we had the merge of the futures clearing business. And that was very important because once you merge all the clearing business for the different types of contracts that we had, you can maximize contracts, you can maximize the collateral giving by each investor, consolidating their overall positions into only one clearing. And now we are in the second step of this project, that is to implement the futures clearing in conjunction with the equity market futures, with the equity market clearing, which will enable all multi-asset investors to have their collateral maximized in terms of positions at the exchange. And with that, it would be the initial step for a real prime brokerage business that Brazil now wants to develop. So here's just to give you a little bit perspective of where we are and who are the main investors and companies. And in the next slides, you're going to see that I have good stories and bad stories to tell. I think the bad story is in the number of individual accounts with the exchange. When in a country with over 200 million people, we only have under 600,000 individual accounts with stock brokerage accounts open at the brokerage firms. It's very, very low. Just to give you and to put in perspective, the exchange itself in 2010 had a very ambitious plan to go into at 2015, where we are now, to have at least 5 million accounts, and that didn't take off. Didn't take off maybe because of the performance. The equity market has not been performed since 2010. In fact, when we had the 2008 crisis and we had the market recovering, 2010 was the peak of the Brazilian market, and since then the equities in Brazil have only been trading downwards. So not new people there. Here is, I think, the good part of the example in Brazil. The fund industry. The fund industry in Brazil, if you combine what is out there with the public, the general public, and with the pension funds, we are at 2.9 trillion reais, a little bit under $1 trillion. It's between the 6th and 7th largest fund industry in Brazil. And that fund industry was only created 15 years ago, not so long ago. And that was, again, being seeded by the local banks. Now we have over 500 different asset managers in Brazil, which all together have like very different strategies, multi-market strategies, equity strategies, fixed income, REITs, like REITs, like real estate investment funds, and we also have private equity inside there. So the broad type of investors that we bring with that, again, to Annette's point, give a basis to seed the growth of company strategies and the economy as well. We saw that throughout 2005 to 2010, when we saw a lot of companies coming public, and that continues to have and give the basis for that development today. And unfortunately, the equity portion has not evolved that much. If you'd see, in 2009, 2010 were exactly the point in which in which we reached the peak levels in terms of asset allocation. But since then, because of performance, the allocation is being cut. And again, we are fixed income a market with interest rates of 14.25 when we reached the lowest ever, 7.25. So, in fact, fixed income tends to lead. Here is one other example of where we have not evolved, in my view. We had a big period of many IPOs, but still we are 353 companies listed in Brazil. Like with the economy the size that we have, with the market participants that we have, I think that's very little. That's very little. Like if we compare to any other market, like for instance, Korea, just beside us, I think that's where we can be ashamed. And in fact, one of the things that we clearly see that it's a problem is that everyone still is very focused on liquidity, and only the large companies are being possible to trade and being out there. So this is a big obstacle that we need to overcome, because clearly that's where we do not do well at all. We also have a developed pension fund industry, which over 70 different pension funds. And I think, in fact, the pension funds were the first big institutional investors that we had in Brazil. In fact, we started to see them, their creation in the 70s, especially with the state-owned companies like Banco do Brasil, Petrobras, Vale, that they started their own funds, and they were the biggest investors in Brazil by far for at least 20 years. Now we can see that the fund management industry have surpassed them, and they lost importance. So to you here that in Colombia, I see that the pension funds are very important, and they are, but we also need to see the development of a fund management industry, which clearly can diversify strategies and financing for your economy as well. That we saw in Brazil, and clearly this is where an area which I think that we're doing well. Here's just to give an idea of and break down. I basically show the 30 largest asset managers in Brazil, and we break down by the type of funds that they manage. As you see, Banco do Brasil Asset Manager is the largest asset manager in Brazil. Their numbers are a little bit not inflated, but are helped because Previ is the largest pension fund in Brazil and largest pension fund in Latin America, is counted inside Banco do Brasil. Then it comes Itaú, Bradesco, as I said, like the banks giving support to that business development in Brazil, Banco Santander, BTG Pactual, and then HSBC, and we have several other independent asset managers, like for instance, Hedging Grifo, which is the biggest Brazilian hedge fund. That is, I think, one of the big success stories that we had. That was an independent broker that has probably the best portfolio manager in Brazil, which had outstanding results out of in the past 20 years, and he was able to capture a lot of funds under management and could go solo. And that's where we see that everything in terms of this industry was backed or seeded by the banks or by the brokers or people who have worked on those institutions with their strategies that were proved right, and then they went outside to implement their own business. So here, essentially the bulk of the money is in fixed income, as you can see. Then we have the multi-asset class funds, which are essentially the hedge funds, which is also very important. The majority of the assets there continues to be fixed income, but you have like long-short strategies in there. You have dollar risk in there as well. Like in fact this year, these funds are doing exceptionally well in Brazil, long dollars. So this is the second, I think, biggest asset class within the industry. Then we had the FX, only FX exposure, and then external debt, that those were very big in the 90s and early 2000s when we had like more stabilization of Brazil. These funds started to lose more interest from the investors. We have the equity, the pure long-only funds, which you can see it's small relative to the overall market. We have the pension plans, which are also inside there, which are also big, but the pension plans that it's privately sponsored. And we have the closed-end funds and credit funds, which is they're relatively new, but they're growing very fast. And we have, as I said, the real estate funds, which grew very fast when we saw interest rates decline into the lowest level in 2012. And private equity also in there, and the offshore funds. That's the overall industry that we have, 2.7 trillion reais. Okay, essentially here's are the pension funds, and I disclose exactly in the same format. So I won't go much into that. Now I wanted to show some trading statistics on the different markets to give you a sense of where we are in terms of market participation and who are the main investors and how the number or the volume evolved throughout time. So here's the average daily volume for the equity market, where we saw a big jump, as you can see. We're seeing a decline this year, essentially because of the very high interest rates, and local investors saw very strong withdrawals in their funds, in the equity funds this year. So international investors came and basically increased their participation in the overall volume. And here's essentially all the futures market volume that it's accounted in number of contracts. That's how the futures business, they count their volumes by number of contracts. As you can see, they also had a small decline, and mainly because of the equity investors as well this year. Here's a breakdown of who are the main investors in first, the equities. As you can see, now foreign investors account for 53% of the trading volume at the Bovespa, at the exchange. If you look 10 years ago, they were like 33. Individual investors were 27%, 25%, sorry, and now they are only 13%. And local institutional investors, they're sort of still keeping the share of 27%. On the futures market, you see that the presence of foreign investors have also been growing and being more and more important. That being in all products, being fixed, being in interest rate, that is the biggest market, then FX, the second biggest market, and then the IBOV futures, then it's the third largest market. Here, I think it's interesting to share as well numbers where we see the equity market evolution vis-a-vis the United States and the companies that are listed only in Brazil and the companies that we have dual listing, and where are the venues that they trade. If you'd see back in 1999, essentially, or before that, everything was only traded in Brazil. Then we started the creation, or the big companies in Brazil started to list ADRs, being Petrobras, Vale, the banks, and we saw them trading in the New York Stock Exchange, that is the red bar. And the yellow bar is where they traded outside in the United States, in Brazil, but they had ADRs as well. Throughout the time, we saw that the New York Stock Exchange lost space for other venues, that is the blue bars. And what we saw that all the new issuance were made only in Brazil, and we were able sort of to cap the overall market share around 65% of the shares traded only in Brazil, and now 35% in New York. Here I show a little bit the evolution of the initial public offerings and number of companies and follow-ons that we had throughout the period. The point to make is that clearly the biggest portion that we had were 2006, 2007, just before the crisis. Right after, we had a recovery in terms at least in issuances, but now we are essentially at very low levels. We had only one IPO this year and only one big follow-on transaction. So numbers came off quite substantially. And that is a result, essentially, I think, because of the macro situation that we're facing. Here, it's just to give an idea of how many contracts are open at the Ibovespa futures and the average daily volumes that we have there. And that's the notional. I think that the notional explains a little bit the size of that. The notional outstanding is 25 billion reais open in contracts. If you'd see that around our market capitalization in Brazil today is 2.5 trillion, you see that these numbers are still shy. I think we have the instruments, and people and the participants, they have a way to mitigate risk and to hedge exposure, but the opportunity for growth in derivatives is still very, very high. If you'd see the Bovespa, as I showed, trade around 6-7 billion reais a day, the futures markets trades 3.2 billion reais a day in the IBOV. So it's half of that volume. It's not that large. If you'd see the component of the leverage, we can still grow quite substantially in that front as well. Here, I think it's the type of investor that trades the IBOV futures. It's now 53% it's foreign investors. You see that how important the participation of foreign investors is in the market. And institutional local investors, it's 41%. Essentially, both of them covered almost everything in terms of the trading there. This is the stock lending market evolution. As I said, it was created in 2002. The growth was very strong until 2007. We had a setback in 2008 with the crisis. Basically, people reduced all their short exposures because of the market was cheap or the stocks went down too much. No one had interest to be short the names. Then since that, we start to see a recovery. And then since 2012, 11, 12, this market has been rolling around 40 billion reais outstanding contract, which is a good number. And the average rate for this market is 2%. Now we've been seeing an increasing participation of foreign investors on that. In the beginning, they were very reluctant to lend their securities in the market, basically because they would have to lend and give the shares at the CBLC system, the central counterpart that manages all the collateral for the stock lending business in Brazil. They were not comfortable with it, but now they are, and we've been seeing an increasing activity from the international investors on that front. I think with that, we took a good opportunity at Citi because Citi has a big custody of international accounts with that, and with being able to lend that inventory to the market, which has been a good thing for us. Here's just to show how it's spread the composition of the Bovespa today. Before it was a completely almost entire based on commodities. Now I can say that financials are the biggest part of the index. Local consumption is also big. Cyclical names like commodities names still big, but reduce the participation dramatically. And that happened when we had a new methodology for the index right after the debacle of Ike Batista's companies. Essentially, he had a very large oil company in terms of a market cap with big liquidity, and the index was based in liquidity, not market cap weighted. And then the Bovespa saw the need to make sure that we had a fair representation by the largest companies in Brazil. So essentially, that's where we are in terms of companies being represented in the market. And in my last slide, I basically put the differences between trading and settlement, Brazil versus the United States. In Brazil, internalization of orders is forbidden, as in the United States, this is allowed. So if we receive orders, we can close transactions over the phone, but everything has to go on tape, and it has to be crossed at the exchange. In the United States, you don't have that need. So I think it's a big difference that we have there, and it's one part of the complaints that we hear from international investors. That rule was created in Brazil essentially to protect pension funds that in the past we had many off-market transactions, and we had like a pricing that was not appropriated. And the regulator in Brazil wanted to ban that, and that's the reason that rule was established. But now, with the market evolution and with more regulation that we have out there, I think we need to reassess that, and we've been pushing regulators internally to make sure that we are more flexible, following right parameters. As I said, Bovespa and the futures exchange, they have a vertical system where everything goes through the brokers and to the exchange, and the exchange is responsible for settling and clearing all the transactions done on its venue. And it's different from the United States when, again, internalization of orders is allowed, and the brokers, they clear and settle DTC or versus their own delivery, or they do their settlements among themselves and not in a centralized area where Brazil does. So those are essentially the big differences that we see between United States and Brazil in terms of trading. And to finalize, for development of capital markets, I think it's key to have the participation of everyone. We are all agents of the public savings, and we need to make sure that we improve their rights in order to protect their savings. And we have to guarantee and push with the regulators and work with the regulators that we have the right parameters in place. I think we did part of that, as I said, with the Novo Mercado rules. We did part of that pushing for changes in corporate governance. So like with the changes that we had, situations like the one that we saw recently here in Colombia with Éxito, for instance, they're not allowed in Brazil. In situations like that, controlling shareholders are prevented from voting in restructurings proposed by them. They can propose, but minority shareholders would be the ones that would be voting and approving or rejecting the new structure. So we have to make sure that the right regulation is there and the right access is there. So the need to have the banks and the brokers working to push to have the right infrastructure in terms of futures, in terms of stock lending activities, where more and more you can have different strategies in the market, I think are key to make sure that you have a development for the market as a whole. So that's all I had to pass it on. Hopefully was interesting. And if you have any doubts, please feel free to look for me up. Thank you.
¿Tienen alguna pregunta? Por favor, levantar la mano y se les acerca el micrófono. Aquí.
Thank you for your presentation. It's interesting you mentioned how the ADRs, when they came about, you kept about 65% of the trading volume in Brazil. Some people here tend to view the ADRs as competing with the local market. What's your view on that? Are they cannibalizing each other, or do you think that, on the other hand, they complement and overall volume increases?
I think they complement. And because with the ADRs, you can, again, increase or have a better reach of people cannot trade local markets, which honestly today, it's being less of an issue. Before it was, like you had several investors that could not reach the local markets, and through the ADR you can. And you can still have the arbitrage opportunities creating shares there and destroying here and creating the ADR. And you have an activity of arbitrage that local bank or the banks are very active. So when you have a stock with ADRs, in my opinion, the overall liquidity increases.
Roberto, Annette, you mentioned governance as a very important part of making a market stronger and more developed. What are those main characteristics that you have for Novo Mercado that you think are worth having in markets such as Colombia? And do you think that was part of the development, the strong development the retail and asset management industry had after the development of the Novo Mercado?
Federico, the Novo Mercado was very important, but it was not alone on this case. Like when the Novo Mercado, as I said, was formed, essentially what we had there was one share, one vote, and same rights exactly for each share. So in transactions that we were seeing in Brazil at that time, that controlling shareholders were selling control like for premiums of 100, 200% over the shares that were listed. Essentially at that time we saw, hey, the shares that trade in a market do not represent the value of that business. And we saw very clearly in that opportunity. That was the main thing behind the Novo Mercado. And one of the things that was behind was that we had a chamber of arbitrage when we had conflicts between the controlling shareholders and minority shareholders, which was also important. But again, was the Novo Mercado pushed the people at the Brazil Congress to change and amend the corporate law, because that had to go through the Brazilian Congress. And we also had a lot of improvements done at the security exchange level with like regulations which prevent like controlling shareholders that propose a share restructuring, that they benefit from the share restructuring, not to vote. And that was exactly that you know, is putting more rights and protecting all that fund management industry and that money that is there to also be playing with the value of the companies as it should be, and not be completely biased towards the controlling shareholders as it was. For instance, like we had a case on our telecom system that was Oi, that proposed a share restructuring, a full merger of common shares and preferred shares, and they were offering the common shareholders, which essentially the controllers had the biggest part of, a premium of over 200%. And then the SEC, the CVM in Brazil, basically blocked the controller shareholders to vote on that. And the share restructuring was rejected. So creating structures where we can guarantee that a fair treatment is given to minority shareholders is key. And that's where I think we made a big evolution in the past 10 years.
Bueno, señor Rocha, muchísimas gracias por su interesante presentación.